From the New York Times, it's The Headlines. I'm Tracy Mumford. Today's Monday, March 17th. Here's what we're covering. The Trump administration has set up a legal showdown and a possible constitutional crisis with its latest deportations. Over the weekend, it flew hundreds of Venezuelan migrants out of the country and turned them over to a prison in El Salvador, which is being paid by the U.S. to hold them. The administration said it had the authority to deport them because it claimed they were members of a violent criminal gang that was invading the country. A judge in D.C. rejected that rationale, saying he did not believe the deportations were legal under federal law. And he said that the detainees should be brought back, quote, however that's accomplished, whether turning around the plane or not. But El Salvador's president mocked the judge's order, writing on social media, oopsie, too late. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reshared that post, and the White House press secretary went further, claiming federal courts, quote, have no jurisdiction over how the president conducts foreign affairs. It was not the only deportation to spark concerns this weekend. A woman from Lebanon who works as a kidney transplant specialist in the U.S. was also deported, even though she had a valid visa and a court order blocking her expulsion, according to her lawyer. The judge in her case said there was reason to believe immigration authorities had willfully disobeyed his order.
One could argue that we've slowly been heading towards a constitutional crisis for a few weeks now. In several cases, we've had plaintiffs come in and say, hey, judge, the administration is not following the court order that you issued.
Mattathias Schwartz covers federal courts for The Times. He says the big question now is if and how the courts might try to reassert their power.
If a court were to find the administration in contempt, they would have the power to impose financial penalties, fines on government agencies. They would theoretically have the power to put government officials in prison if they thought that was warranted. But then there's also the question of who exactly is going to enforce these orders. In the final analysis, courts don't have the power to enforce their own orders. And this is what people really are talking about when they talk about a constitutional crisis, that if the executive decides that it's just not going to listen to the courts, there's sort of a very limited set of things that the courts can do in response, because the courts rely on the executive branch to enforce their orders. So what do they do if the executive branch says, we're just going to do what we want, we don't care? No one really knows what happens then.
Also on the immigration front, President Trump has brought back family detention, the practice of locking up parents and children together while they await deportation. The contentious tactic was used under Presidents Bush and Obama and during Trump's first term. But human rights organizations have called it inhumane, especially for young children, and it fell out of use under the Biden administration. Now, families are being held again at a facility in South Texas, and a second facility in the area is being prepared to hold more. The number of federal employees who've been fired or taken buyout offers under the Trump administration has now climbed past 100,000. The Times has been tracking how that downsizing effort has been rippling through the government, and my colleagues have found that the cuts have hit the agency responsible for nuclear security. The National Nuclear Security Administration, which is part of the Department of Energy, develops and maintains the country's nuclear arsenal. In the past 5 years, it's been busier than at any point since the Cold War. It's in the middle of upgrading and modernizing thousands of nuclear bombs and warheads. It had been working to hire new employees to complete the work. Then DOGE arrived. The Trump administration fired about 24 staffers. Another 130 plus took buyouts. A Times review of internal documents, along with interviews with agency officials, shows that included nuclear scientists, bomb engineers, and safety experts who were in critical roles, and that many of them had held top-secret security clearance. Without their oversight, the agency's effort to upgrade the nuclear stockpile could be compromised. And critics say the situation shows the broader consequences of DOGE's drastic cutbacks, that people with specialized skills and decades of experience are leaving crucial government positions. In Gaza, it's now been more than 2 weeks since Israel cut off all aid shipments to the territory. It's trying to pressure Hamas in negotiations over extending the ceasefire. Israel's cut off food shipments and severed electricity to a water plant. The United Nations says that's deprived around 600,000 Palestinians of clean drinking water.
The fact that no aid is coming in now means that Gaza could be headed back toward the dark days of the war when people were facing extreme hunger, a lack of water, very low hospital supplies, and basically anything you can think of was running low.
Vivian Yi is part of the team covering Gaza for The Times.
My colleague Bilal Shaber has been doing some reporting inside of Gaza, and desperation is growing again as aid groups have been forced to cut back on food packages that they give out to families. Community kitchens have had to give out smaller rations. He's seeing people wait in these long, desperate lines for bread and people kind of crowding the bakery door, desperate for a couple of loaves for their families. And there are people in Gaza who say that traders and businessmen are basically taking advantage of the situation and hoarding goods in order to drive up the price and maximize their profits. From what we're seeing on the ground, in the beginning of the ceasefire, people were very cautiously optimistic that they would be able to recover and rebuild from the war. The fighting would end, and this nightmare of searching for food every day, searching for fuel, searching for water would be over. And instead, it seems like they might be regressing toward what they had suffered before.
Obviously, we're excited to get Crew 9 back, and I know Butch and Sonny are excited to come back. And it'll take a little time to get them back reconditioned, and then we'll do the proper celebration. And see if
NASA says that the two astronauts who've been on an unexpectedly long mission to space could be back on Earth as soon as tomorrow night. Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore's return from the International Space Station has been delayed for more than 8 months due to technical issues. But yesterday, the SpaceX capsule that will take them home successfully docked at the station, and the new crew of astronauts who will take their spots floated on. Usually, crews overlap by a week, but NASA's bumping up the return window to try and take advantage of clear weather. The journey back to Earth will be a 17-hour affair, ending off the Gulf Coast of Florida, where the astronauts are expected to splash down. And finally, the New England Aquarium in Boston has opened a retirement home, or retirement island, for penguins. It's because the aquarium's fleet of African penguins has been outliving expectations. In the wild, they live to be about 10 or 15, but the aquarium's now got a bunch of birds in their mid-30s. And, like all of us in our mid-30s, they need someplace a little quieter, a little chiller, without all of those young birds being loud and getting all the fish first. The aquarium's penguin curator described it as a country club for older animals. Basically, it's a meshed-off area where they can still see the other birds, but they don't have to get jostled or pecked by them. Part of the reason the penguins at the aquarium have been outliving expectations is because they don't have to deal with the threats that wild birds do, but also because they're receiving specialized care, including acupuncture for their arthritis. Yes, the penguins are getting acupuncture. Those are the headlines. Today on The Daily, how the fight over government funding has sparked a war within the Democratic Party. That's next in the New York Times audio app, or you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tracy Mumford. We'll be back tomorrow.